The fire in the Aspen Lodge was roaring, but the room instantly froze. Grandma Mary didn't shout. She just set her crystal glass down with a sharp clink that silenced the Christmas toast. "Lauren, answer me," she said, her voice lethal. "Why are strangers posting photos from inside the $1.2 million ski lodge I bought for you 3 years ago?" I froze mid-sip. I looked at my parents, then my sister Alexis. "Grandma, what are you talking about?" I whispered. "I don't have a lodge. I'm homeless right now." Alexis turned ghost white. Then, the digital lock on the front door beeped. "Drop a comment, and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even drop my fork. In that frozen moment, as the digital lock on the front door beeped a warning, the panic that usually governed my life simply evaporated. It was replaced by a temperature that matched the blizzard raging outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. Absolute zero. My father, James, was the first to move. He laughed, a nervous, jagged sound that cracked the silence. "Mom, you're confusing the poor girl," he said, reaching for the wine bottle. "You know your memory isn't what it used to be. You bought that little cabin for yourself, remember? Lauren doesn't own anything." He tried to pour more wine, but his hand was shaking so badly the dark red liquid splashed onto the white tablecloth. It looked like a crime scene. I looked at my grandmother. She didn't blink. She just tapped her phone screen. A second later, my phone buzzed in my lap. It wasn't a text message. It was a notification from the county clerk's automated system, forwarded by Grandma. "Deed transfer confirmed. Owner, Lauren Miller. Date, 3 years ago." The screen glowed up at me, illuminating the lie that had defined my entire adult life. For 3 years, I had believed I was a failure. I had believed I was incapable of securing a lease, that my credit was shot, that I was lucky to have friends who let me sleep on their sofas. I had eaten instant noodles for Thanksgiving dinner last year, while my parents posted photos from this very lodge. I had worked until my hands cramped, illustrating for pennies, believing I was digging myself out of a hole. But there was no hole. I wasn't poor. I was the landlord. The nausea in my stomach vanished. It was replaced by clarity. This wasn't a family dinner anymore. It was a deposition. I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor, making my mother, Melissa, flinch. I reached across the table, not for my water, but for the bottle of vintage Cabernet my father was still clutching. I took it from his hand. He was too stunned to resist. "Lauren, honey, what are you doing?" My mother whispered, her eyes wide and terrified. "Sit down. You're making a scene." I didn't answer. I walked over to the roaring stone fireplace. The heat was intense, but I felt cold. I looked at the label. $2,000 a bottle. My money. I tilted the bottle and poured the entire contents into the fire. The flames hissed and flared, turning purple and black, filling the room with the smell of burning alcohol and oak. I watched until the last drop fell, then I tossed the empty glass bottle onto the logs, where it shattered. I turned back to them. The silence was heavy, suffocating. "You told me you couldn't co-sign my lease because my income was too unstable," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, flat, devoid of the pleading tone I had used with them for a decade. "You told me I was a burden on the family finances. You told me I needed to learn to stand on my own 2 feet. I looked directly at my mother. Her face was pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "All that time, while I was sleeping in a living room in Queens, you were collecting rent on my property. $6,000 a month. For 36 months. That is $216,000, Mother." I didn't ask if it was true. I didn't ask for an explanation. I stated the number like I was reading a verdict. "Where is my money?" My sister Alexis finally spoke, her voice shrill and defensive. "You're crazy. You're literally delusional. This is exactly why Mom and Dad handle your finances. You think you own this place? You're just an illustrator, Lauren. You can't even afford your own Uber." I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in years. I didn't see the successful influencer she pretended to be. I saw a parasite in a designer dress that I had unknowingly paid for. Grandma didn't buy this for me to live in, I said, walking back to the head of the table. She bought it as an asset. And you didn't just steal the house. You stole 3 years of my life. I picked up my fork and took a bite of the roast beef. It tasted like ash. Start talking, James. And don't you dare blame your mother's memory. Tell me exactly how you forged my signature, or I swear to God, the police waiting outside won't be the only thing ruining your Christmas. For 1,095 days, I lived on the edge of survival. I didn't just feel poor, I felt defective. I stared at my mother across the table, but I wasn't seeing her perfectly applied makeup or the diamonds around her neck. I was seeing the ceiling of my friend Sarah's living room, where I stared at a water stain for 3 weeks because I couldn't afford a security deposit. I was tasting the sodium of the 99-cent ramen packets I ate for dinner 5 nights a week, telling myself I was being fiscally responsible. I was feeling the bone-deep shame of declining every wedding invitation, every birthday dinner, every girl's trip because I didn't have the funds to buy a plane ticket. You told me I was broken, I said, my voice quiet but filling the room. You told me my credit score was destroyed. You told me that because I was an artist, I was a liability. I walked closer to them. My father refused to meet my eyes. He was staring at the shattered wine bottle in the fireplace. You didn't just steal the house, James. You stole my sanity. You made me believe I was incapable of managing my own life. You convinced me that I needed you to save me from myself. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a copy of the court document Grandma had sent me. I unfolded it and slammed it onto the table next to the roast beef. Power of attorney, granted due to incapacitation, I read. Reason listed. Severe gambling addiction. Alexis gasped. My mother flinched, as if I'd slapped her. I have never bought a lottery ticket in my life, I said. I have never stepped foot in a casino. I don't even play poker for matchsticks. But you stood in front of a judge, under oath, and you told him your daughter was a sick, compulsive gambler who would lose this property if you didn't intervene. I looked at my sister. Her designer bag was sitting on the floor. I knew exactly how much it cost because I had illustrated the ad campaign for that brand last year. It cost $4,000. More than my car. I finally understood the psychology of the thief. It's called projection, isn't it? I asked, looking from my mother to my sister. You didn't accuse me of being a gambler because you thought I was sick. You accused me because you needed a cover story for your own sickness. I pointed at the lodge, at the opulent decorations, at the pile of gifts under the tree. You were the ones gambling. You were betting my future on your lifestyle. You called me an addict so no one would look at the bank statements and see who the real junkies were. You needed me to be the villain, so you could play the heroes who were burdening themselves with my messy estate. The realization hit me harder than the cold. They hadn't just taken the money. They had taken my reputation. They had rewritten my history to make me a tragedy, so they could live as a triumph. Every time you told me to be careful with money, every time you lectured me about responsibility, you were just confessing, I said. You were telling me exactly what you were doing. You were the thieves crying thief. My mother finally found her voice. It was thin and trembling. Lauren, please. We can explain. It was a legal technicality. We had to protect the asset. Protect it? I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. You didn't protect it. You devoured it. And now, the audit is open. The air in the room was suffocating, heavy with the weight of exposed secrets. My father, James, clenched his jaw, the veins in his neck bulging. He finally stood, his chair scraping violently against the floor. Listen to me, Lauren, he growled, pointing a shaking finger at me. We did what we had to do. You were erratic. You were drifting. We couldn't let $1 million asset sit in the hands of someone who draws pictures for a living. We invested that money. We grew it. We protected it for the family. For the family? I repeated, my voice steady. Or for Alexis. I turned to my sister. She was still sitting there, clutching her $4,000 bag like a lifeline. She looked small, despite her expensive clothes. Alexis, how much is your credit card debt right now? I asked. 30,000? 40? She looked away, biting her lip. Try 85,000, Grandma Mary said from the head of the table. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp as flint. I've seen the statements, Alexis. Your parents have been paying the minimums with Lauren's rent money for 2 years. The room went silent again. This time, the shame was palpable. This is the golden child dynamic, isn't it? Grandma continued, looking at my parents with disgust. You crippled her. You never let her fail, so she never learned to stand. You gave her everything, and it made her weak.
She turned to me.
And you, Lauren, they gave you nothing. They threw you to the wolves, hoping you'd disappear. But instead, you learned to hunt. You became the strongest person at this table because you had to survive them. My mother started to sob. Not the delicate, performative crying she usually did, but ugly, desperate gasps. It wasn't for her own good. We love her. We just wanted her to have the same opportunities. Opportunities? I interrupted. You stole my future to fund her failures. You called me a gambling addict to cover up her actual addiction to spending money she didn't earn. You projected every single one of your flaws onto me because you couldn't face the fact that your perfect daughter is a parasite. Alexis stood up then, her face red and blotchy. I didn't ask for this. She screamed, her voice cracking. I didn't ask them to steal your house. They told me it was an investment property. They told me you didn't want it. And you believed them? I asked, looking her dead in the eye. Or was it just easier to believe them because it meant you got a free venue for your brand and a bailout for your debts? She didn't answer. She couldn't. The truth hung between us, undeniable and ugly. My parents hadn't just stolen money. They had stolen my sister's potential, too. By shielding her from every consequence, they had turned her into exactly what they accused me of being: helpless, entitled, and a liability. And me? They had tried to break me. Instead, they had forged me. The front door beeped again. A notification popped up on the tablet Grandma had placed on the table. Motion detected. Exterior. Front porch. They're here, Grandma said, her voice devoid of emotion. My father looked at the tablet, then at the door, panic rising in his chest. Who's here? The people who enforce the law, James, Grandma replied. Because, unlike you, I believe in consequences. My father laughed, but the sound was thin, like ice cracking under pressure. The law? He sneered, though his eyes kept darting to the window. You think the police care about a family dispute? This is a civil matter, Lauren. It's your word against ours. We have the deed in the trust. We have the emails where you agreed to let us manage the property. He was bluffing. I knew it. He knew it. But he was betting on the one thing that had always worked for him: my silence. He was betting that I didn't have the stomach to call him a liar to his face. You don't have emails, James, Grandma said, cutting through his bravado. You have forgeries. And as for my word against yours, she reached into her purse and pulled out a sleek, black tablet. She tapped the screen, and the large television mounted above the fireplace flickered to life. I didn't just buy this lodge, she said, her voice steady. I modernized it. I installed a comprehensive smart home system 3 years ago. Every room is wired. Every conversation is logged. And every file is backed up to a private cloud server that only I can access. On the screen, a video file began to play. The timestamp was from 2 years ago. The camera angle was from the corner of the living room ceiling, wide and crystal clear. In the video, my parents and Alexis were sitting on the same leather couches they were sitting on now. They were laughing, clinking glasses of champagne. She actually believes she's broke. My mother's voice rang out from the speakers, tinny, but unmistakable. I told her we couldn't help with the security deposit because the market was down. She thanked me for trying. On screen, my father chuckled. It's almost too easy. The girl has no head for business. If we told her the sky was green, she'd buy tinted glasses. I need another 10 grand for the launch party, Alexis said in the video, scrolling on her phone. Just transfer it from a lodge account. Lauren won't notice. She thinks she's overdrawn. Done, my father said, tapping his tablet. Another month of rent, Another month of funding the Alexis brand. The video cut to black. The silence in the room was absolute. The only sound was the crackling of the fire and the heavy, terrified breathing of my family. My mother looked at the TV, then at Grandma, her face a mask of horror. "You recorded us?" she whispered. "That's illegal. You can't record people in their own home." "It's not your home, Melissa," I said, my voice cold. "It's mine. And in my house, security cameras are legal." Grandma tapped the tablet again. The screen split. On one side was the paused video of their confession. On the other, a live video call connected. A man in a suit appeared. He was sitting in a home office, looking serious. I recognized him immediately. It was Mr. Sterling, the family's estate attorney, the one my father thought was retired. "I've seen enough," Mr. Sterling said from the screen. His voice filled the room, authoritative and final. "James, Melissa, this footage confirms conspiracy to commit wire fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny. I've already forwarded the files to the district attorney." My father stumbled back, as if he'd been punched. The arrogance that had sustained him for 3 years evaporated, leaving a small, frightened man in its wake. "This isn't just a family dispute anymore," James, Grandma said, closing the tablet cover with a snap. "It's evidence." The digital lock on the front door beeped again. A heavy, authoritative knock followed. It wasn't the tentative knock of a guest. It was the demand of the law. "They aren't here to escort you out," I said, watching the blood drain from my sister's face. "They're here to execute a warrant." My father looked at the door, then at me. For the first time in my life, I saw him truly afraid. Not angry, not manipulative, terrified. "Lauren, tell them to stop," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "We can fix this. We can pay you back. Just don't let them come in." I looked at him. I thought about the 3 years of instant noodles. I thought about the friends' couches. I thought about the shame that had eaten me alive. "It's too late for that, Dad," I said. "You're already on camera." Mr. Sterling didn't hang up. On the screen, he adjusted his glasses, looking down at a file on his desk. The movement was slow, deliberate, and terrifying. "James, you seem to be under the impression that this is merely about the deed," Mr. Sterling said. "You think if you return the property, this all goes away. But we ran a title search this morning." He looked up, his eyes locking onto my father's through the camera lens. "There are 3 secondary mortgages on this lodge, James. There is a home equity line of credit that has been maxed out. You didn't just steal the asset. You hollowed it out." The room seemed to tilt. I grabbed the edge of the table to steady myself. I had thought they were just living here for free. I had thought they were just collecting the rent. But they hadn't just occupied my house. They had devoured it. "You forged Lauren's signature on loan documents 4 separate times," Mr. Sterling continued, reading from the file. "You leveraged a $1.2 million asset until it was underwater. You committed bank fraud, wire fraud, and aggravated identity theft." I looked at my mother. She had stopped crying. She was staring at the floor, catatonic. "Where did the money go?" I asked. My voice was a whisper, but in the silent room, it sounded like a scream. "You took out hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt in my name. Where is it?" Mr. Sterling answered for them. "We traced the transfers, Lauren. They went to a shell company registered to Alexis." I turned to my sister. She shrank back into the leather sofa, pulling her knees to her chest. "It wasn't a gambling addiction, was it?" I said, the pieces finally clicking together. "The judge, the power of attorney. You told the court I was a gambler because you needed an excuse to control the finances. But the debt wasn't mine. It was hers." Alexis started shaking her head, tears streaming down her face. "It was for the brand," she wailed. "I needed inventory. I needed to pay the influencers. It was going to pay off, Lauren, I swear. I just needed more time." "You spent my house on Instagram ads?" I asked, feeling a strange, heavy lightness in my chest. It was the feeling of validation. For 3 years, I had questioned my own sanity. I had wondered if maybe I was bad with money, if maybe I did need their help. But I wasn't crazy. I wasn't incompetent. I was just the host for a parasite. "They banked on you never fighting back," Grandma Mary said softly. "They bet everything on your silence. They thought you were so beaten down, so conditioned to be the good, quiet daughter, that you would never think to check the title on a house you thought you didn't own. My father looked up, his face gray. "We can fix it," he whispered. "We can refinance. We can." Mr. Sterling cut him off. "There is no we, James. The banks have already been notified of the fraud. The accounts are frozen." The banging on the front door returned, louder this time. "Open the door. Police. We have a warrant." It wasn't a noise complaint. It wasn't a welfare check. It was the end of the line. My mother grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Lauren, please. They'll take us to jail. It's Christmas Eve. Please just tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you gave us permission." I looked down at her hand on my arm. It was the same hand that had signed my name on those loan documents. It was the same hand that had waved me away when I asked for help with rent. I pulled my arm away. "I can't do that, Mom," I said.
"Why?"
she shrieked. "Why are you doing this to us?" "Because I don't lie," I said. "And unlike you, I pay my own debts." My mother fell to her knees. It was a theatrical, desperate gesture, the kind she usually reserved for when she wanted a new car or a vacation upgrade. But this time, the terror in her eyes was real. "Lauren, baby, please," she wailed, reaching for the hem of my dress. "We're family. You can't let them take us away on Christmas. Just tell them to go away. We'll fix it. We'll sign the house back over. We'll do anything." My father, James, joined the chorus. He didn't kneel, but he looked small, broken. "Lauren, think about what you're doing. You're ruining our lives over money. Over a house. Is that who you are? Is that how we raised you?" I looked at them. I looked at Alexis, sobbing into her hands. I looked at the wreckage of their dignity. A year ago, I would have broken. I would have internalized their guilt. I would have convinced myself that I was being cruel, that I owed them my protection because we shared blood. I would have spoken. I would have argued, justified, explained. But tonight, I did something different. I did absolutely nothing. I didn't step back. I didn't speak. I simply stood there and let their pleas hang in the air, unanswered. I let the silence stretch until it became a physical weight in the room. My silence forced them to hear themselves. It forced them to hear the hollowness of their excuses, the selfishness of their demands. It stripped away the argument and left only their crimes exposed. Grandma Mary watched them with a look of profound sadness. She stood up slowly, leaning on the table. "You still don't get it, do you?" she asked quietly. "You think this is about the lodge?" My father looked at her, confused. "It is about the lodge. It's about the money." "No, James," Grandma said. "It was never about the lodge. The lodge was a test." She walked over to the fireplace, the light dancing on her silver hair. 3 years ago, I decided it was time to pass on the family estate," she said. "But I knew you. I knew you were greedy, James. I knew you were reckless, Melissa. And I knew you were raising Alexis to be useless." She turned to face them. "So, I created a test. I bought a relatively small asset, this lodge, and I gave it to the one person in this family who had never asked me for a dime. Lauren." I looked at Grandma, stunned. "I wanted to see what you would do," she continued, looking at my parents. "I wanted to see if you could respect her property. I wanted to see if you would help her manage it, or if you would try to take it." She pulled a thick, leather-bound folder from her bag. She dropped it onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud that echoed in the silent room. "That folder contains the deed to the Hanson Family Trust," Grandma said. "It holds the majority of my assets. Commercial real estate, stock portfolios, land rights." She looked at my father, her eyes hard. "The total value is just over $20 million. My father's mouth fell open. My mother stopped crying instantly. "The trust was scheduled to vest tonight," Grandma said, checking her watch. "At midnight on Christmas Eve. The beneficiary designation was open. If you had treated Lauren with respect, if you had managed this lodge with integrity, or even if you had just left it alone, the trust would have been split equally among you." She paused, letting the magnitude of the number sink in. $20 million, James. You stole a $1.2 million house and loaded it with debt, and in doing so, you torched a $20 million inheritance. My father looked like he was going to be sick. He stared at the folder, then at Grandma, then at the lodge around him. The math was crushing him. If you had been honest once, Grandma said, her voice dropping to a whisper. If you had just been decent parents once, you would be multimillionaires by morning. But you couldn't help yourselves. You had to steal the crumbs, so you lost the feast. The banging on the door stopped. The lock beeped one final time as the override code was entered from the outside. The door swung open. A gust of snow blew into the warm room, followed by 3 police officers. Mr. James Miller? The lead officer asked, stepping into the foyer. We have a warrant for your arrest. My father didn't move. He was still staring at the folder on the table, realizing that his greed hadn't just cost him his freedom. It had cost him a fortune. I watched them put the handcuffs on him. I watched them read my mother her rights as she screamed that it was a mistake. I watched Alexis being let out, still crying about her brand. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The price of their betrayal had finally been paid in full. The heavy oak door clicked shut, cutting off the wind and the shouting. The flashing lights of the police cruisers faded into the whiteout of the blizzard, leaving only the soft amber glow of the porch lights. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy with relief. It felt like the sudden, ringing quiet after a bomb goes off. Grandma Mary walked over to the smart home panel and typed in a code. System locked. The security shutters lowered over the windows, sealing us in. I sat down on the hearth, the warmth of the fire finally penetrating the cold that had settled in my bones. I looked at the table, still set for a Christmas dinner that would never happen. The roast was cold. The wine was gone. I pulled out my phone. A notification from Mr. Sterling had just come through. Asset recovery initiated. Foreclosure on secondary loans halted. I scrolled down my contact list until I found Alexis's name. There were 12 missed calls from her, time-stamped just before the police took her phone. I didn't listen to the voicemails. I didn't send a final text to explain why I had done it. I just hit block. Then I did the same for my mother. And my father. I looked up at Grandma. She was pouring herself a glass of water, her hand steady. She caught my eye and raised the glass in a silent toast. It's over, Lauren, she said softly. I looked around the lodge. My lodge. For the first time, I didn't see it as a symbol of their theft. I saw it as a fortress. I'm safe, I whispered, testing the words. You're more than safe, Grandma corrected. You're sovereign. I looked out the window, past the shutters, at the snow burying their tire tracks. The storm would cover everything by morning. It would look like they had never been here at all. I was safe. I was rich. And for the first time in my life, I was free. If you've ever had to cut off toxic family to save your own future, share the story. You are not alone.